Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Sprues. In today's video, we'll be continuing our look at various 1/72nd scale 190s with IBG's long-nose D-9 series. So without further ado, let's have a look at this kit. So starting out with the box, we have a very nice rendered image of two FW190Ds flying through some clouds with white 12 in front here and yellow 15 in the background. We've got the IBG model logo in the top there and the usual titles with the name of FW190D9, and it's, forgive my terrible German, but I believe it's Mimetall, which is one of the factories that were producing the 190. And in this corner here we have the scale at 1/72nd and a product number of 72536. The box art is repeated on the sides there, and on the bottom we have the barcode, a few little warnings, as well as the contact details for IBG Models, a age recommendation of 14 plus, and a few of their other products, including the 190D9 Cot Bus early production, which is the one I did a couple years ago. We've also got a price tag here from the hobby shop I brought this one at, which was my local one, but I'll talk about pricing at the end of this video. And otherwise, on the top we've got three different schemes of 190s, and it doesn't tell you what the details are for them, but I assume they're the three marking options included in this kit. And we also have a Made in Poland text here, and as usual for IBG, there is nothing on the back. As usual, this one is a open top box, so you pull the top off, and as you can see, we have quite a large number of bags here with a reasonably small number of parts on each of these sprues, and quite a lot of little ones on some of these other ones here, plus a fair few clear parts, an extra little piece here, our decals, and at the very bottom here we have our instructions. The instructions come in a booklet format, and they're printed in colour, which is also really great, so I'm quite a big fan so far of these. And as typical for most brands, on the front we have a very nice detailed history of the FW190D series in both English and Polish, along with the contact details once again for IBG Models if you have any issues, and a few repeats of their logo and the box art. Opening up the first page, we have our sprue maps here, and they're very nicely done. They're very clear and easy to see, although there are no numbers to identify any of the parts, which is a little bit of a weird choice there. But at least you can sort of see what you're supposed to get, including the photo-etch and the decal sheets. A few little guides here for assembly, not super clear, they're all quite similar. Then on the inside here we have our painting guide and marking guide as well for the engine, cockpit, fuel tank, more of the engine and the landing gear and propeller, which is a bit of a weird place to put this stuff. I'd think you'd want to do it after you've assembled it, but oh well, for whatever reason they've sort of done a marking guide here, which is a bit weird. And then we've got our paint guides here with both Vallejo, Hataka, Live Color, Mr. Hobby, and AK Interactive. So you've got a very nice large selection of different color codes that you could easily translate if you don't have the one here that you want. And they've also got just a plain word for each of the colors, as well as the RLM codes on some of these as well, which is very convenient. And each color's been given a letter code for the instructions, which is good. And another thing that's great is these instructions are fully in color, not just the logos like some instructions. So you can very clearly see what each color is supposed to be on these parts, which is great. But opening up, we have our first steps for assembly. And it begins with the engine here, so putting these two halves together, plus the rear section, the gearbox, and then the top, or well, the bottom, since it's an inverted V12. Then we've got the exhausts, looks like the cylinder head covers there. Not too sure what this piece is, might be part of the crankshaft system or something like that. And we have a little bit of piping here, which gets glued to the side there. All pretty easy to follow and nicely laid out with very clear part numbers and colors indicated. Then we've got, on the other side, more exhausts and cylinder head covers. These little pipes here, which seem to be leading to each of the cylinders. Forgive me, I'm not a expert on engines and how they work. And then again, we've got some more piping on the other side. Then we've got what I believe would be our supercharger here with some more piping going to it, along with parts of the rear of the engine there. And then we've finally got our framework that the engine would attach to. So quite a nice option here with the detailed engine. It looks pretty good. There's quite a lot of little parts that look quite nicely detailed in these instructions here. Moving on to step 5, we start with the cockpit, which is a bit more usual for most builds. And as you can see, we've got a cockpit tub piece here, along with various photo-etched parts. I believe that's for the throttle. Photo-etched rudder pedals there, judging by the PE. And then we've got our joystick and the seat. There's also a marking guide here for painting the interior walls of the cockpit, since they have a fair bit of raised and recessed details. Then for step 6, we have the main instrument panel, which needs a little bit of surgery and modification to remove some extra parts. And then there's some photo-etched switches, or a single lever there, and another painting guide here. Plus, we've also got some photo-etch decals, which should look pretty good. Moving on, we've then got our, I believe, machine guns, which sort of go in behind the engines, and they get sort of clipped into these ammunition belts and ammunition storage areas. For step 8, we then have the glare shield section, and that attaches to a firewall, which also has a bit of the wing spar molded to it, which, you attach to the cockpit tub there. Then turning over the page for step 9, we have the machine guns, which are getting added to that firewall there. Plus, we then glue on the engine for step 10. So it's pretty interesting, a bit of a different way of assembling the kit, and it reminds me a little bit more about how aircraft are sort of actually built. Apart from not really having ribbing, obviously, it's sort of got those internal structures and looks like it's got quite a lot of fantastic details. Then we've got gluing the fuselage halves together, and as you can see, you've sort of got to carefully line some of these parts up, so I'd imagine this could be quite a fiddly little assembly, and if you get something wrong, it might not fit very well. Another issue that I know other people have talked about when making this kit is, as you can see, the engine cowlings are molded to the fuselage, and I don't believe you're supplied with the option to have them open. So even though you've done all this amazing detail on the inside there, unless you do a fair bit of surgery and cut sections of the fuselage up very carefully, you're not going to see it, which is a real shame. But either way, once you've glued the two fuselage halves to the interior and engine assembly, you then have the upper cowling that goes on top here, plus this sort of ring dome that goes on the front near the engine. You've got a piece of photo etch here to scribe extra details if you want on the underside. I think it's quite cool that they've included it. It would have been nice, obviously, if it was molded to the plastic, but given that it's on the sort of underside there, it might have been a little bit tricky. So at least they're giving you the option, if you want to put a bit of extra detail in, to use that. Then we've got the lower wing half here, along with some of the internal details for the wheel well, which gets glued to that, and then you glue the wing spar to the wings. Following this, you've also got to sand part of the rudder antenna there, by the looks of things, or the tail antenna. Obviously to make it a particular variant, which is a bit of a finicky job, but if you want to go that extra mile, it's good that they let you know to do it. Moving on, we then have our cannons for the interior of the wings, and as you can see, we've got a barrel there to glue, plus some photo-etched pieces for the various frameworks surrounding it. So much finer detail than the Airfix or Eduard kits, which did have a little bit of that. I think Tamiya did have a few extra parts as well, but this is obviously going to be quite a lot more detailed. Then we've got the upper wing halves, which appear to have to be carefully joined at the center there, where the root is, and then glued to the wingtip there. So that looks a little bit fiddly, and again, if you don't assemble anything in here correctly, or some of the things wrong, you might have a fair bit of trouble. We've then got our control surfaces, so the ailerons for the wings, which by the looks of things you could pose if you wanted to. Plus we've got the rudders and elevators separate, and the main part of the horizontal stabilizers to attach at this stage. And then we've got the front part of the engine cowling, or where the radiator is, and we're gluing the propeller to the radiator section. Doesn't appear to be a washer or anything, so if you want the propeller to spin, you might have to do that yourself, but I'd imagine most people who build this are going to want it to be static anyways. You've also got the spinner cover for the propeller there, and we've got the air intake here for the supercharging system, plus some photo etch parts for, I believe, the exhausts, by the looks of things. It appears that you sort of bend them and then glue them there, and in the finished sort of picture of what it should look like, it's there. And we've also got another little intake for the top of the engine there, plus what I believe is the starter crank handle for the inertia system. So I believe that would sort of spool up the inertia wheel, and then the pilot would engage it and start up the engine. So that's a pretty awesome little feature there. Would have been nice if there was a pilot figure and ground crew, I should probably point out, but obviously you can't have everything. Moving on, we then have the landing gear assembly here, with the main landing gear strut, followed by the wheel door cover. We've also got some photo etch parts here for part of the landing gear, Plus we've got a separate hub and tyre piece there, which should make it a little bit easier to glue them. And I believe in brackets you've got the opposite part for each side, so you sort of got to repeat that assembly. We've got optional parts for the bottom here with the rack there for the fuel tank, and we've got some photo-etched pieces here for some of the access hatches. Then we've got the tail wheel here, which gets glued into place. It doesn't show that you have the option to have the landing gear and tail wheel retracted. I'd imagine if you wanted to, you could do a little bit of surgery and just glue the landing gear doors shut. But obviously no pilot figure, so a lot of people probably would want it on the ground, especially with all that nice engine details. We've also got the various antennas, which are made out of photo-etch, plus the step ladder, which is, again, only in the down position. So if you wanted the aircraft in flight, you would have to chop that up. We've also got the landing gear indicator pin here, which would be an absolutely tiny little piece of photo-etch there, but it's there if you want to add it on. And we've got the other antenna on the underside here, which requires a little bit of folding, but then you glue it to the underside there. So yeah, quite a fantastic level of detail there. They've also got the painting guide for all of these little parts there in color, which is pretty cool. Then finally, we have the canopy assembly, starting with the front piece here. And there's even a photo-etched option for the gun or a clear part, I'd imagine there. Plus a bit of photo etching for the framework on the inside of the front windshield, which is a fantastic amount of detail. For the rear canopy section here, it appears we only have one option for canopy, even though there are a few included in this kit. And there's a little bit of assembly for the interior headrest part there, which gets glued into there. And we've also got a coloured guide with a decal marking for the details on the headrest. And once that's done, you can then glue it in either the opened or the closed position. It looks like this step is for if the aircraft's canopy is closed and this one is open. So similar to the Airfix, the Edgewide kit, you have the slightly wider version of the canopy frame when it's sort of open and slid back on the rails, which is a nice touch. And finally, you've then got the rigging wire diagram, which shows the rigging wire in red. And obviously if it was open, it would be quite slack and droop down like that, but when it's shut, it would be nice and tight. And that's pretty much it for assembly. On this page, we've got some more promotion for their other products. And following that, we've also got our common stencils guide, which isn't too exhaustive, but it's quite nicely spread out, so it's pretty easy to see where all those markings go. And they're all in color, which is also quite nice because they're very visible and easy to see. Lastly, for the instructions, we then have our actual marking guides for the individual schemes. And for the first one, we have Yellow 13, which was flown by, I'm not going to do a very good job, but Dieter Krauglau, and that was part of Operation Bodenplatte on the 1st of January 1945, and this aircraft was part of Jagdgeschwader 26 with a work number of 500093. And as you can see, the color guides are in color, which is great. And this particular aircraft has a lot of the late war markings of a 190D, with the various colors on the underside there, such as the different variations of RLM 76 with the more blue and the more yellow, with the dark brown and dark green, which I think was 81 and 82 on the upper surface, and a mismatched tail, possibly from another factory that was making them, and then they didn't quite match up. And yeah, quite a very patchy looking aircraft with those different panel variations or colors, which is pretty cool. It looks like it's even got a strip of aluminium on the underside wing, which is also a common feature, but the front is painted with the brownish 82, so quite a interesting example of a late war aircraft there. For the second one, we have the aircraft featured on the box, which was White 12 with a work number of 500408. And it's from Jagdgeschwader 301, and it was based at Bad Leisingsaal in May 1945. Again, I apologize for that. And again, it's got the various mismatching panels, although it hasn't got as much of the lighter blue on the front there. It's sort of all of that yellowish tone of 76 that was used later on in the war. So again, quite an interesting and attractive looking scheme. And finally, we have the third aircraft on the back here, which is Brown 18, with a work number of 500968 from Jagdgeschwader 26 in Jagel, May 1945. So it's got different coloured bands there, and again, it's mainly the later war 76 that was a bit more yellow. And this one's got a fully blue and aluminium underside for the wings there, with the landing gear covers done in brown. So we've got a few very similar but slightly different variations for late war 190 schemes there, which I believe are all from the same factory, or at least that's the idea for this kit. So pretty nice looking ones. If you didn't fancy any of them, they've got a few other releases of the 190 which have different schemes, which are cool. But for the most part, variety's not too bad. The layout of these instructions is fantastic. I love that it's all in color and quite easily broken down in steps. Some of the assembly looks very fiddly, so definitely not for a beginner, and hopefully the engineering on all these parts is good, and if you assemble it correctly, it shouldn't be too hard. It would have been nice, though, if they'd included a pilot and a ground crew figure, and obviously for this, it would have been really great if they had separate engine cowling pieces so that you could choose to glue them in the open position rather than having to do a lot of surgery and cut them up, which is a bit of a pain. But on the whole, instructions look pretty great. So we'll move on now to having a look at the plastic parts. So this kit has quite a lot of plastic bags. There's 6 in total, so each sprue gets its own, plus there's an extra bag for the clear parts. So we'll have a look at sprue A here first, since it's the first in the alphabet. And as you can see, this sprue contains a lot of the smaller bits and pieces, with the various spinners here in the corner. Now, one thing you'll notice is we get quite a lot of spare parts, a bit like the Eduard 190A kits. They tend to recycle this tooling for various releases with different parts, so you will get a fair few that we won't be using, such as these ones with the various options for spinner types and I believe different armament. But we've got a lot of other parts here, such as the ammunition boxes there with the little belts, and they've got a bit of raised riveting and detailing on them, which looks pretty good. There's a few little ejector pin mark parts to cut away, but for the most part they're pretty cleanly moulded, and there is a bit of a nasty seam line on them, but nothing too bad. We've got a few other bits here, like this looks like the interior part for the wings, plus the drop tank holder. Here we've got our instrument panel, which as you can see has some very nicely done and very clean raised details for all of the instrument dials. I believe there's a decal included, although you'll probably want to sand these flat to try and get it to conform to them, or you could maybe have a go at just painting them, because they do look quite nice. We've got our rudder here, which looks quite cleanly moulded, with some raised lines here for the rib work. I believe they were fabric on the later ones, or possibly metal, but they look pretty good. We've got our main wing spar here with the firewall there, which looks fantastic. We've got some really nice recessed holes and details, plus all of these little parts here for the cannons to join to, with some fantastic raised ribbing and riveting details, which look great. There are a few little bits of flashing here and there that might need to be cleaned up, especially if you want to get this kit to fit nicely together, but for the most part, pretty cleanly moulded. I don't think there's much detail on the inside here, but that's okay, because this is sort of all that you will see. Got some very tiny little air intake pieces here by the looks of things, along with our seat, which is pretty basic, but good enough. Got our glare shield here, which looks alright. There does appear to be a few little tiny bits of flash on it, but nothing too major. 2 different options of drop tank here. We've got one that's sort of got these raised parts on top of it and different panels, and these 2 which appear to be smooth at the bottom. In fact, I think actually it might be that we get 2 drop tanks that are identical, because as you can see by the part numbers, they're the exact same. So that's a little bit odd. Don't know why they'd bother to include 2 drop tanks, as I don't believe the 190 ever carried 2 at once. But oh well, at least you might get a spare, which is cool. Got our step ladder here, which looks pretty cleanly moulded. Fantastic little detail here for the cannons, which look pretty good. Or the machine guns, I believe, that were in the cowlings. So yeah, they're looking quite nice. Got a very nicely moulded tail wheel with some fantastic detail on the hub there, along with the various bits of the strut, which look great. We've got a few different variations for engine mounts by the looks of things. I believe that we're using this version in this kit. This part appears to contain a tank of some kind with a few different variations, so they've gone to a lot of detail by the looks of things with getting the variations right on these 190s. Then we've got a few other small little antenna pieces here. Looks like our cannon barrels, which are pretty basic but good enough. The handle here for the crank start, and the joystick here, which looks fantastically detailed. And I got to say, on the whole, there are a few little bits of flash here and there, and a couple of these larger parts have a slight seam line. But for the most part, the detail on these is really crisp and they're very cleanly moulded, so yeah, very fantastically done. Moving on to Sprue B here, this one appears to have a lot of the common parts, a bit like the previous Sprue, with another variation of drop tank here, which is slightly smaller. Then we've got the elevators there, which are very similarly done to the rudders with the raised ribs there. Then we've got our horizontal stabilizers, and it sort of gives you the first taste of what the surface detail is like on the rest of the aircraft. And as you can see, we have some absolutely fantastic rivet detail with some very nice recessed panel lines, all of which are very cleanly molded without what looks like too many scuffs or any imperfections. And on the underside, again, same story, it is very nicely done. Here we've got our cockpit tub, which, similar to the main instrument panel, has some very nice raised and recessed details, including all these nice little hinges for that rear access hatch there behind the canopy, and all those little dials and switches and fuses. They all look fantastic. And we've got some nice little squares there to help line up the seat and the joystick, plus we've got those little mounting brackets for the rudder pedals, so they look fantastic. We've got our ailerons here, which are looking pretty good as well. They're raised ribs, which look quite nice and quite accurate. I believe they might have been metal on the 190Ds, but I could be mistaken, but they look pretty accurate. We've got two different options by the looks of things for the front of the engine, with a slightly different setup for the radiator, and I think this one is a little bit wider. Then we've got that interior piece here for the engine, which I don't think you'll see too much of, but they've done a pretty nice job detailing it by the looks of things with all those little holes, so that's quite cleanly done. The detail on all of those engine cowling radiators there is absolutely fantastic. Even on the inside here, you can see all of the details there, which look great. Here we've got our landing gear struts with some fantastic details on these springs and all the little joints there. They look really great. Got our landing gear cover here with some very nice recessed details for those rivet holes there, and some raised details for these little sort of hinges there, which look great. We've got part of the framework for the seat. I believe there's two different options there for the headrests. There are a few little bits of plastic there that look like they need to be sanded away, a little bit of burring on the edges there, but nothing too major. And then we've got our tyres here, which appear to be quite a late war version without too much of a tread pattern, but they've done a very nice job with those details there. Not too much of a seam line, although the tyres, it's a bit hard to tell. I think they might be slightly weighted on the bottom there. And then we've got part of the hub details for the tyres. They even look fantastic on the inside details there, which is pretty great. And also the landing gear cover doors, they also have some very nice detail on the inside. Plus, there's a lot of little holes here to help line them up with the landing gear, so they should be quite nice and solid. So again, pretty fantastic looking sprue. There are a few little areas where there's some flash, but for the most part, details look fantastic. And now we have Sprue E, which is the next in the order. So there does appear to be a few different sprues that they've skipped for this version, or perhaps they never used them. Either way, though, this is the next one. And as you can see, we've got our two fuselage halves, and they are fantastically done. There's some really lovely details there with all of those rivets, and I think they've not only done the main sort of structural rivets, which you sort of get on a few kits, but they've done all of the smaller ones too. I'm personally quite a fan of these kind of rivets on these models. I think it really adds a lot of detail and character. I'm sure they're technically quite overscaled for 72nd scale, given how small rivet details are, but you tend to see a fair bit of them on aircraft, especially if they've got a bit of weathering on them, so I think it's quite a nice and forgivable option there, and pretty fantastic to get those sorts of details out of the box without needing to painstakingly use a rivet tool. There are a few areas sort of when the aircraft curves where the detail gets a bit soft just because of how moulding is done, but for the most part the main area of details are fantastic. They've done nice raised and subtle hatch details for the various access hatches on the aircraft, and a few little areas where there are raised rivets, which is pretty good, and some very nice detail around the engine cowling there, which looks fantastic. Again, it's a real shame that they didn't mould these as separate sort of pieces, because to open up the engine cowling now, you'll have to cut along this line very carefully and then remove that. And that is a lot of work, and you're very likely to damage some of that fantastic riveting detail. But oh well, I guess that's what it is. On the inside, there is a little bit of raised framework here for lining up the cockpit, but honestly, for 190s, you don't tend to have too much detail there. And all of the ejector pin marks are on the inside here, which is fantastic. They're nice and out of the way. Another issue is if you want to have the engine cowling open, I believe you'll have to actually drill through this part here where the supercharger intake is. So again, a fair bit of surgery required if you want to use all of the parts included in this kit to their fullest potential. But for the most part, if you're just building a 190, even without the engine, it looks pretty fantastic. Jumping a few letters ahead, we now have Sprue J, which is the next in the sequence, and it contains our two upper wing halves. Very similar to the fuselage, they've done a fantastic job with all of those rivet details, with a few raised parts where appropriate. And all of the bulge details look fantastic there, with all of those individual panel lines. And yeah, it's just an absolutely beautiful looking piece of work there with all of those rivets. There's a few little areas that you might have to do a bit of sanding, like this looks like a bit of an awkward joint. It looks like it sort of cuts in a little bit to the plastic parts, so I have to take care when cutting these out. And it looks like they've molded the pitot tube to the outer part of the wing there, which is going to be very tricky to try and not damage when painting or handling the aircraft, but for the most part, pretty decently done. Then we've got a little bit of detail on the inside of the wheel well for the raised sections here, but I believe most of the detail is going to come from the Photo-etch, which should also cover the ejector pin marks, so a pretty clever use there. Next we have Sprue K, which contains our lower wing halves, along with the propeller in the corner here, the air intake for the supercharger, and a option for one of the possible upper cowling arrangements. Again, fantastic recessed riveting details on the underside. As you can see, absolutely beautiful. There aren't too many raised parts here, apart from that sort of little bulge here and a few little bits here and there. But for the most part, absolutely fantastic. The propeller also has some quite nice gearing details where it sort of adjusts. So I guess if you wanted to have the spinner cover off, you could as well, which is quite cool. Supercharger looks pretty good. The way they've done it in those two halves means that it's fully hollow on the inside there, so if you drilled out the engine cowling parts, you should be able to get a pretty nice amount of detail from those. And the engine cowling part here, again, is pretty fantastically done. Some very nice recessed riveting details and a few of the areas where there are hinges. And yeah, the holes for the machine guns aren't quite fully drilled out. There appears to be a little bit of plastic in the way, but with a very small needle or a pin vise, you should be able to open those back up. And there's not really too much interior detail here, just a little bit of guiding areas to help line up some of the parts. And again, all of the ejector pin marks are on the inside. Interestingly, we've got a lot of little holes here, which must be for various accessory parts on the outer wings. Possibly a bombing version of this aircraft, which I believe they did do, although I'm not too sure if they had them on the wings. But obviously that's for another kit because I don't recall seeing anything about drilling these out, but pretty cool. You can tell that they recycle the toolings, but at least they're in pretty great shape and the detail on them is absolutely fantastic. We have another sprue here, Sprue P, and it is by far the smallest of them all with literally just one part. Obviously this is probably for our particular version as it's just a type of engine cowling. I think it's got slightly different bulges on the side there, but otherwise looks pretty similar. Or it might be something to do with that extra little part here for a air intake. So yeah, they've obviously done a lot of research to make sure you're building the correct variant of each aircraft from each factory or production run, which is fantastic. And the final dark grey plastic sprue we have is the engine by the looks of things. And like the rest of the kit, looks like we have some absolutely fantastic detail. We have these very fine and very nicely done either ignition or exhaust wires that kind of go to the individual cylinders by the looks of things, with some very nice raised rivet details on these parts. Then we've sort of got the bottom piece of the engine, which I think is sort of like an oil pan kind of thing. And it's got fantastic recessed gouges and rivets details with some nice little looks like individual kind of bolts that are sort of recessed in, which look fantastic. Got our various bits of piping here and the front sort of gearbox section of the engine there, which again, some very nice recessed and raised details. Very nicely done exhausts there. I don't believe there's any hole in them, but you could probably drill them out if you so wished. Got a pretty nice amount of detail on the main part of the engine block there, which looks pretty great. The rear section here with, I think you've got your little magnetos and a few other little parts here, look absolutely fantastic. Looks like we've got some different options here for superchargers, which are slightly different, and I guess depending on which one you're building, you'd use them. Then we've got another little bit of detail here with some fantastic recessed and raised rivets and panels and all sorts of details, which look great. We've got some more ammunition and cannon armament options. I believe there was a variant that had a 30mm that fired through the hub of the propeller, so that might be for that one. Then we've got some other smaller little accessory bits and these sort of cylinder head covers and more piping. So all of these details are absolutely fantastic, and by the looks of things, they've done a bit of research to make sure even the engine details are correct for each model, which is amazing. And yeah, I'm sure even if you didn't build the aircraft with the engine in place, obviously you'd have to use these exhausts, but if you could get some spare exhausts, maybe you could even assemble the engine as a separate model and have it on the side, which might be something I do, since I don't know if I really want to go to the effort of cutting up the fuselage. But yeah, very awesome engine details, and it's not very common to get them in 72nd scale warbirds, so I think it's pretty great. And now we have the final sprue, and that is the clear parts here. So we've got two different canopy options, as is typical with 190 kits. Once again, I think you've got the earlier, more flatter hood, and then the later blown one, which I think is the one that we'll be using. And they have the slightly narrower version when it's closed, or the open version, which is a little bit fatter. So, plus we've also got our windscreen, and we've got a clear option for the gun sight there. So these sprues look pretty nicely done. There doesn't appear to be too many scratches or imperfections, although this one does appear to have a fingernail or a fingerprint, which might have just been mine from holding it. But yeah, they're pretty nicely done. The clear parts are quite rounded, so there is a little bit of distortion, but probably on the smaller side compared to the other 190 kits we've had a look at. And they've even done some raised rivet detailing on the framework of the canopies, which is fantastic. And our clear part here for the front windshield is very cleanly molded as well, and quite nice. Plastic's not too thick. It is a little bit thick, but definitely passable. And yeah, pretty nicely done clear parts. Of course, there's still a little bit more to this kit. We also have our decals, which are printed by TechMod, who I haven't heard of. But I have used IBG decals on the other 190 that I did quite a while back, and I don't remember having too many issues. I think they were a little bit more delicate than Cartograph ones, but the print quality on them is still pretty good. And as you can see, we've also got all of our Photo-etch. And as you can see, we might as well start with this since it's in my hand. We have a separate sheet here for the common stencils, and the detail on them is pretty amazing. A lot of that small, fine writing is perfectly eligible, especially if you read German. And yeah, we've got optional decals here for our instrument panels, which look pretty good. They're fully coloured too, so I guess you could theoretically just sand off the details, plonk them in place, and that would be it. And yeah, very nice job with all of those fine markings there. A lot of detail, and obviously a fair bit of research has gone into these kits. I don't know if you'll use all of these markings, because a few of them are for different fuel ratings and placards and all sorts of different colours for markings. But obviously, if you don't use them all, you'll end up with some leftovers, which is awesome. Nice to have a few spares. And our main markings here for the schemes included are pretty good as well. As you can see, they're all the later war sort of roundels where they didn't use the black and the white. They sort of just did the cross symbol, so that was a bit simplified. All of the work numbers are pretty nice and eligible. There does appear to be a few little weird bits of dust or something on top of these, so obviously not the cleanest in the factory. And I don't recall these decals silvering too much, but fortunately there doesn't appear to be too much clear film except where it's absolutely necessary, so they're quite nicely done. And of course you have the tail marking here, which is to obviously get around printing laws done in two halves there. So good that you've got that option, especially for a kit of this level of detail. If you want to go really historically accurate, you can do that. And yeah, for the most part, decals look pretty good, and as I've said, don't recall having too many issues with them in the past from IBG. And lastly, we have our Photo-etch parts here, which, as you can see, are pretty nicely done. There's various bits here for the inside of the landing gear, such as the sort of covers there, which have all of those raised details for the framework and the rivet details. A few little bits here for what looks like a optional bomb. We've got our rudder pedals there with the straps as a separate piece. Various other little structural parts. Not too sure what these parts are, but they may not be used in this kit. And we've got our seat belts there, various little antennas, few little details such as these sort of square access hatches and more antennas. And yeah, for the most part, pretty nicely done. And we've got that spare little optional stencil piece here to add some extra recessed access hatches and hatch details for the inside of the engine cowling. So again, pretty fantastic little bits of photo etch there. If you didn't want to, you probably could get away with not using a lot of these, but if you wanted to, they're there and you've got a lot of detail from them. So that pretty much wraps up our look at this kit, and on the whole, it's obviously quite a fantastically detailed model. There's a lot of really nice details, especially all of those rivets, and it's awesome that you have that interior detail for the engine and the wheel wells. Looks really great. Cockpit looks fantastic as well. Nice little choice of markings, and obviously they've reissued this kit quite a few times, so if this isn't quite the variant you want, or you're not quite happy with the markings, you can obviously find a lot of other ones, even some sort of experimental ones, which is awesome. The only things that sort of let this kit down, in my opinion, are the lack of any pilot or ground crew figures, which would have really been awesome and just added it to the next level. The fact that the engine cowling access hatches are all shut, so the only way to open them is to do a lot of surgery, even though it's got an engine feature built into the kit, and they haven't bothered to do that. It's not the end of the world, but it is frustrating, and given how nice all of that surface detail is, you've got to be so careful not to damage it, and there are a few other little bits and pieces that have to be done for it to work out. Though the biggest issue I have with this kit is the pricing, which I'll talk about now. So most kits of 190s, the A models, are around about the 20 AUD sort of mark. Some of the other ones are sort of getting closer to 25 and 26, and I think about 30 for Eduard's more Profi pack versions of the A series. However, it seems to me, at least in Australia, there aren't too many options for D models. I have had a look at the Italeri kit previously, although it's quite an old one that's been reissued, and it retails for around about 25 to 30 AUD, which I think is already a bit much for an old kit like it is. But this kit typically retails for around about 45 to 35, which is almost double that. So that, I think, is a little bit crazy. Granted, there are some fantastic details, a lot of research has gone into it, and you get a few extra goodies with the photo etch. But really, given that, I think it's still a little bit overpriced, to say the least. They've done a lot of different issues of this kit, all for a similar price, so I think with the mileage they'd get out of this tooling, they could have probably dropped it a little bit. But it is very well researched, and obviously for a dedicated modeler, so maybe it's not a big bother to a lot of people, but to me personally, that was a bit of a deal breaker. In fact, the only reason I sort of picked this one up is because, as you can see, it was actually on sale by quite a large margin. $32, definitely worth it, I think, for this kit, but $45 to me is starting to get a little bit nuts for a single-engined World War II fighter in 1/72nd scale. Otherwise, though, quite a fantastic looking kit with a lot of awesome features. I'm very much looking forward to doing this one, and hopefully even trying an airbrush on it, if I've got a little bit of skill. And yeah, I'm not sure if I want to do it with a opened engine, just because of how much surgery that has to be done, and I don't really want to damage the model. Plus, I'd really like a nice example of a 190D that's sort of more ready to fly. Maybe I'll even have the engine as a separate piece and just 3D print some extra exhausts for it, so that's an option. I did do this kit, as I've mentioned, a few years back when I worked in the hobby shop. I sort of did one as a sponsored video just to experiment with some weathering and environment products. So I actually did it in a crash diagram, which I've done a video on. Back then, I didn't really have the skills that I do now, and I mean, I'd hardly call myself an expert now. Even this model's still a bit intimidating, but I'm looking forward to having another go at it with a bit more skill and experience up my belt. And maybe I'll even restore that model, because I kind of wish I did it in a not crashed configuration, and I've probably got enough spare parts and stuff to do so. So that might also be a video I do. Otherwise though, this kit will get a build in the not too distant future, and I'm looking forward to doing it. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and also consider subscribing to the channel and checking out my Patreon page. A massive shout out to my current patrons for their wonderful support in helping me to not only buy these kits, but also the products I use when I make them. So I was hoping to get a second video done for this week, but it's taken me a little bit longer to finish off the PST KV2 than I originally thought, so it's going to be coming out next week instead. And in other news, I have also finally gotten myself an airbrushing setup, so expect to see a few build videos featuring that in the future, which I'm excited about. Anyways though, thanks again for watching this one, and until the next video, as always, take care and model on.